Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. This is a part of our monthly Lunch Hour webinar series. My name is Marcia Ruimel, and I am a doctoral student in the Workforce Education and Development Program at the Penn State University. I will be moderating today's webinar along with my colleagues Asa Al-Hajri and Halima Hatta, who are also in the same program, and Jose Sandoval, a PhD candidate in the Department of Learning Design and Technology. For today's interactive webinar format, please use the chat features in the Zoom. If you have any questions during the presentation, type them in the chat. The Q&A session will follow at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change is designed for professionals seeking the skills and knowledge to lead organizational change effectively. Additionally, we offer master's and PhD programs in the workforce education and development with concentrations in human resource development and organization development. Our program has established a continuous monthly free webinar series featuring experts from around the globe. Today, we are excited to present the role of coaching Today we are excited to present Innovating Teacher Education, Research-Based Strategies for Documentary-Based Learning and Low-Tech Simulations by Dr. Jeffrey Matthew. Jeffrey Matthew is an education researcher and skill development specialist with expertise in career technical education and education for sustainable development. His work spans through East Africa, the Middle East, and North Africa, focusing on aligning education systems with labor market needs. He promotes innovative strategies such as documentary-based learning and low-tech simulations to bridge classroom learning with real-world skills. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker of today, Dr. Jeffrey Matthew. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marcia, for that warm introduction and sharing of my profile. But I also want to thank yourself, Jose, Aja, and Halima for facilitating this process and the invitation to speak at this month's webinar. So very excited to be doing that. Before jumping into the presentation, I just want to maybe just provide context for my presentation. That way, at least you're able to position yourself in the discussion, but also I'm looking forward to us having an engaging discussion. Context, obviously, when I say innovating teacher education, it's obviously very broad, and I don't want to make the presentation more broad than it needs. What I'm actually sharing is things that are already there, and it's the question is this the time for us to begin using them? I will keep the boundaries focused on the education system, but if you're coming from learning and development, for example, this is very relevant when you look thinking about adult workers and how you train them for industry. So in this particular case, I'm looking at adult learners, specifically teachers, and how do we ensure that they have the right skills to then be able to be effective classroom teachers, but also to support with this transition from school to the world of work. Maybe the other piece that I just want to maybe provide is I will be focusing not on the full education spectrum. I'm just looking at the higher secondary and post-secondary stream. So it's looking at that group of students who just about to go into the world of work, or they're thinking about maybe employment / going to higher education, or people who've already finished high school. They've done post-secondary training that is supposed to put them into the world of work. That's a group that I'm looking for. So I'll use interchangeable terms here, such as technical and vocational education or career and technical education. They're all very similar, but that's a group of students that I'm looking for. I want, before maybe jump into the presentation, maybe just starting off with some key question. How can we prepare teachers to teach real world skills when they never had the chance to experience them? And this will be an overarching question that I keep coming back to, and hence, me talking about how do we reimagine the education system. I know there's a lot of discussion when we talk about AI, and AI could be one of the pieces that complements what I'll be presenting to you today. Marcia has already done a great overview of my profile, and I do not want to go back and repeat what she has mentioned. But I do think that it's important maybe for me to share my positionality. Why is this topic of great interest to me, and why do I see it having any relevance? So I'll only focus on just maybe on my lived experience. So I was a technical education student. I went to a program in high school focused on people who were going to be developed into future aeronautical engineers. But I really struggled as a student. And one of my struggles was that, not that the program was not great, the program was really great. It was just the fact that I just could never make the connection with the content that was being taught in the classroom. And you can imagine, if you're learning how to be an aeronautical engineer, one of the basic requirements would be making sure that you have an aeroplane engine in the classroom, or at least exposure to that, to such facilities. Unfortunately, my experience was we had a glider, and as many of you may already be aware of, gliders do not have an engine. You may learn about maybe the wingspan, the nose, the aeronautical dynamics in terms of how do you flight in the air. But when it comes to fixing, or the thing that had brought me to that particular program, I wasn't getting a lot of the practical side of things. And this was challenging for me. But obviously I'm dating myself, because this was even way, before technology was easily available. So I always wonder, if I had to go back to school today, would I be going through the same experience? But the reason why I share this story, and when I look at some of the work that I've done in international development, but whether it's looking at this career transition, or how students transfer to the world of work, one of the struggles that we've seen is that students still struggle because the way they're taught, it's really creates a disconnect. So they're not able to then translate what they're reading into practical things in the real world. So for me, I find it that this is timely in terms of us asking, now that we have AI, now that we have a lot of technology, is this the time for us to reimagine what education should be? But remember this story, because I'll come back to it at a later slide. So why am I pushing for us to start thinking about innovating teacher education? And then why am I also contradicting myself, saying that it's not, what I'm sharing is really not new? There's been a big debate, when you're looking at how people teach, particularly how you teach adult educators, and the many principles. And I think, Penn State obviously has a big focus on learning through doing. So there's a lot of experiential learning methods as one avenue for teaching adult learners. But there's been a big debate in terms of, does traditional lecture-based learning work, particularly when you're looking for this particular group? In some cases, it does, if it's varied in terms of what information you want to introduce, and then shift into a different way that you can be able to connect with adult learners. So when I talk about innovating teacher education, it's really us coming to this crossroad where we have AI, we have technology. Can we now move to actually having teachers play the role of a facilitator, and then using the other avenues that are there, such as experiential learning, such as storytelling, active learning methods, to ensure that students not only are engaged, but they're also motivated and they're able to retain the knowledge that they're getting. A couple of things why I think that this will be beneficial, and just telling you at the end, the benefits at the beginning, so that if towards the end, I don't need to go back into it. But the number one thing for us, for why we need to innovate teacher education, is it promotes teacher readiness. One of the biggest challenges that we see is teachers who are teaching, particularly if you're teaching the trades, so vocational or technical skills. If you don't have those skills in the first place, you find that the teachers are not even ready when they come to the classroom. And then this obviously leads to students not achieving the outcomes they intended. So if you're looking to develop skills, it becomes a struggle because your teachers are not ready to teach. Your teachers do not have the necessary skills. You as a student then are not able to acquire the knowledge that is needed for you to then be successful in that particular trade. But we also see that if we innovate teacher education, we're now taking advantage of what we have readily available. So one good example, and this is something that you will see me talking about in the presentation, is that in the olden days, going back to my example when I was a student, having access to an engine, a plane engine, was expensive. Having access to videos to be able to see what that plane engine looks like and understanding the different parts were very difficult. But when we look at what YouTube has done, or what Instagram has done, what TikTok is doing, we see that we don't need to go to an airport to look at a plane, to look at a physical engine. We can bring that to the classroom. So this is where I'm saying, if we begin thinking about innovating, the resources have become affordable and easily accessible. And then the last piece about innovating, this helps with alignment with industries. We find that often industry is always reinventing itself, trying to ensure that it's in line or it's meeting industry demands. Education, to some extent, has been very slow to reacting to the technological advances that we're seeing. But just wanted to highlight in terms of, if you're wondering why innovate, what are some of the benefits? So what you see on your screen are some of the things that would be the natural benefits that you would be getting. Why should this matter to you? I'm hoping that there's a large group of folks here, whether you might be an educator, you might be a school leader, you might be someone in policy, or you might also be a student or even a parent or a caregiver. One of the biggest things, and if you're looking at, so for example, a lot of my experience has been in the global south. One of the biggest things that we see is that more than 70% of vocational students end up graduating with not having the skills that is needed for industry. And then when we look at why that is the case, we see that a large number of the teachers who are actually teaching those classes do not have the skill. This creates this conundrum where if you're trying to grow your economies, if you're trying to get people to be in employment, it becomes a challenge if they're not graduating with the skills that industry needs. So this is important. So if you sit in any of the spaces that I mentioned earlier, teacher, leader, policymaker, or student, this is something that we all need to be concerned about, and we should be asking ourselves, are there things that we can do different? And this is where my documentary-based learning and low-tech assimilation comes into play. I am not saying that this is a magic bullet, but I am offering this as one avenue, cost-effective avenue of mitigating some of the challenges that we are seeing happening as a result of not having qualified teachers teaching, or because as a result of them not having the experience that is needed, but also as a result of a large number of students not having access to the skills that they rightfully need to be able to be successful when they transition into the world of work. Before going further, obviously I want to be able to just help paint, what are the challenges? Why is this a big problem, and what exactly is a problem? If teachers can't really teach the practical skills, we really can't expect students to learn. So that's the problems statement that we have. But we see the reason why teachers don't have the practical skills is, one, a lot of countries, because of rightfully so, don't have the resources to be able to provide teachers with practical skills. So we see that a lot of teachers have the knowledge. They've gone through university, they have the theory, but they don't have the industry expertise. So you might find a teacher, for example, teaching carpentry or teaching electrical engineering. They have the theory, but they don't have the practical industry experience. So that's a first challenge we see. Second challenge, and this is very true when you're looking at low middle income countries, the global south, which is maybe not a problem in a lot of global north countries, is that there's a lack of work-based learning opportunities. And this is really critical, especially when you find that technology is rapidly changing. Industries are quickly adjusting to ensure that they keep up with technology. If education systems do not tap to local industry, they will then be producing students who actually will come out with skills that are really not relevant and are skills that are not needed. So the second thing is there's not a lot of work-based learning opportunities and not a lot of labs in the school setting for teachers to be able to bring themselves up with real-world skills. And then the last thing, and this is obviously one of the biggest problems, is classrooms do not have resources. And this is very true. So I don't want to minimize this idea of classrooms not having resources. But this, going back to the previous slide, this is where we now need to reinvent ourselves in terms of to what extent can we bring non-traditional learning tools into the classroom. So this in a nutshell is just maybe what is the core problem in what we're seeing in teacher education, particularly when it relates to technical and vocational education. Before delving into documentary-based learning, or DBL, or low-tech simulation, I just want to provide context. What is it? This is obviously not something new. Many of us are very familiar when we talk about videos, very familiar when we talk about photographs, and maybe even just being even more specific. What we do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's on Instagram, Facebook, a lot of that is documentary based. So that's what I'm talking about, using visuals to be able to tell a story, to be able to use that as a way to teach people skills that they need. When I talk about low-tech simulation, here what I'm really talking about is going back to basic. So it's not really using technology, particularly if you're looking at global south, low middle income countries. A struggle is obviously how do you get access to virtual reality to be able to teach someone welding, for example. It's very difficult. But here I'm talking about just using basic, whether it's just role playing. So if, say, for example, you want to demonstrate how to weld at an equipment, you can just walk someone through that particular process rather than actually having the real equipment. That's what I'm talking about, going to the really basic. Both of these concepts are obviously come into play in terms of ensuring that you're able to deliver skills that are needed at the right time, but also being able to keep up with the change in technology. So if you don't have access to that technology, you could still use creative ways to to at least share that knowledge with your students. This here is just maybe as a reminder in terms of as educators, what are some of the learning styles that are there? And which are the ones that tend to be used often? When we go back to lecture-based, we see that reading and writing has become the norm when we're looking at the current education system that we have. But visual, auditory, and kinesthetic have been there with us even before this formal type of education system has been there. They've been very effective ways of teaching, and particularly when you're looking at adult learners who are coming into class with experience. Sorry about that. Who are coming into the classroom with experience, some of these other learning styles are probably what are probably the ones are most effective reaching that audience. So I'm just highlighting them there, and I'll unpack them slowly. So obviously the one maybe I don't want to make an assumption. Kinesthetic is learning by doing. So this is what we, when you're talking about active learning, experiential learning, it falls under that category. So why DBL and low-tech simulation? I think for me, and going back to the example that I shared with you in terms of my experience going into a classroom and not really understanding or making connection with the theory that I was reading, I think the reason why I think it's timely for us to open the door and begin looking at the alternative ways is because already, and I can attest to this, and I'm sure if I did with a show of hands, how many people actually use YouTube, for example, to learn a new concept that you're learning in class, so that you can be able to study what your teacher or your professor is showing you. Many of you will probably raise your hand. And this just speaks volumes in terms of the fact that we have technology being readily available. I want to maybe share here in form of an education example. As you know, hopefully we have teachers here who can relate to this. But I think the example I'll share with you, I think all of us can be able to relate with this. When we look at, say, the hospitality industry in a lot of the technical and vocational tracks, you have culinary arts. Uh, and you find that a lot of students, if you come in a well-resourced institution, you're able to get all your ingredients. You probably have a top chef teaching you how to mix the ingredients, making sure that you have all the right items, and you're able to do that effectively all the way until presentation. Now, the challenge when you go to a low resource setting, or if you're looking at, global South countries where they don't have access to a top chef to be able to teach them, we see that tools such as Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and just to mention just a few of the popular mediums, have played a big role in terms of people actually going there and talking about how they're cooking a particular thing. So they've made it very easy for folks to be able to go and copy. And I'm guilty of that. There's some foods that I see and I'm like, okay, I want to try to prepare this. So I would go and look at it in my social media platform to be able to see who's done it. And then I try to find who is explaining it in an easy way for me to be able to understand. This is what I think we as education institutions should begin thinking about in terms of how can we curate easy materials that are easy, relatable to the people who are, to the audience. A lot of us tend to enjoy looking at, visuals. We tend to enjoy listening to stories because I'm sure if you're looking at those YouTube videos, many of them will talk through the struggles of how many attempts they've had. And those are the stories that really connect with the person who's listening. Reason why I share this is because if we're not, if we're looking at jobs, the people who are trying to develop skills for the world of work, one of the key challenges, going back to the slide that I shared, is that people graduate and they don't have the requisite skills. And we do, from evidence and that from evidence in terms of the utilization when it comes to looking at either active learning or storytelling, we see that there are a couple of things that it does. It not only has higher engagement and motivation to the student, it also leads to retention of information. You will, if you went back and asked someone about, what was the ingredient that you put in the particular food, I'm willing to bet you that they're going to be able to list them in order. They're even going to tell you at what temperature you needed to have the water, for example. And they'll also even talk to you in terms of how long it needed to be there before it gets ready. But when you're reading the information from, just a lecture-based content, it becomes, as soon as you walk away from reading that material, you find that about 50% of people lose that information. So we see that there's high engagement, high retention. The other piece in terms of YDBL and low-tech simulation, again, looking at this culinary arts scenario. Now, look at the context of, like a low and middle income country. We see that they don't have the resources, but just because you don't have the ingredients, you can role play. You can talk about how many tomatoes that you had, how much pinch of salt that you put into the mix, how long you left it in the water. So you don't have to actually have the ingredient, but being able to role play that. Again, this is having zero resources for you to be able to effectively do that. But that allows you then to at least connect to the information that you're trying to have, and then again, and then in the process developing the skill. But this tells you that you don't need to have all the ingredients to actually do it effectively. And then with all that said, obviously it leads to creating job-ready skills. And again, if you look at the idea of whether you have the resources or not having the resources, the fact that you're able to at least role play, not only do you remember the information, you're able, if you go to a real job setting, you're then able to replicate, what you have seen in visual. In terms of just role playing and DBL, maybe just one of the things, and I'm sure again, if you have teachers, is really being able to understand. Then, if we're saying go to YouTube or us as education system reimagining what platforms to use to educate, what role will teachers play? I will come to that. I am not. This is not the idea of saying that teachers will no longer have a job. It's us now trying to be creative in terms of how do teachers facilitate with all the tools that they have at their disposal. I've shared a few examples in terms of how we can do how we can utilize the media, whether it's getting a YouTube video or TikTok to begin demonstrating certain things that you want your students to be able to learn. Here is just a list of things that you can do depending on where you want to start. So for example, if you don't have the time and resources to go out and curate videos online, so a natural starting point would be role-playing scenarios. So a good example here is if you're doing something, and maybe not using a culinary arts example, maybe using something developing soft skills, for example. So you can go out and have students who want to go and do customer service, for example. A customer has come in, they're very disappointed that they didn't get the order that they were looking for. And having your students prepare, how do they respond to that customer who's come in? How do they de-escalate the situation so that it doesn't go any further? And then how do they provide him with corrective service that they're looking for? This is something that you could have your students, if for example, if they're going to be in roles where they're going to be going to either retail, for example. In terms of case studies, this is also another great example of how you can have students actually problem solve. So this could also play in when you're looking at maybe say experiential learning. This could be something that can help where you have students actually be the ones coming up with a problem. So a good example here, and something that we struggle with in education, is, for example, how do you get more females and women into STEM related fields or in technical tracks that don't have a lot of women in. So for example, carpentry or masonry or even beam mechanics. So how do you get women into those particular programs of study? So this could be something that you give to students to be able to come up with as a case study. How can they resolve that? How can they help with increasing the numbers of students coming in? And this provides a couple of things. It provides them with not only, if you're looking at developing skills, not only team building, but it also helps with problem solving. So a lot of these are skills that they would need when they transition to the world of work, but you're using maybe real cases that you have in your particular community. The third piece, which is probably the one that I'm obviously excited about, because I think it's probably the way when I look at the current generation that we have out there, and a lot of even people within my age group, is we tend to go back to stories, watching videos. I spend a lot of time going to YouTube. So I think in terms of using video excerpts or looking for curated material, or even going out and developing the material themselves, could be an effective way. And an example here would be, if you I gave the example of culinary arts, but I can give another example. I do a lot of home improvement, where you're trying to fix certain things within your house. A lot of the videos provide a step by step, and then I then do the role playing by actually fixing what I'm trying to fix in my house. But this could be creative, innovative ways to have your students view the video, and then the second part would then be having them actually go out and doing what they've actually seen in the video. The other two pieces there that you see on the screen in terms of real-world enactments or mini case documentaries, this is a little bit more time sensitive, but also require a little bit of resources. So in terms of real-world reenactments, this would be depend on the program of study. So would be something that is geared. So maybe a professor or a teacher has something very specific that you want your students to be able to walk away with. So for example, an example here that I would be thinking of is if your students need to be able to know how to build a wall that is stable, that can withstand someone coming to push it, is then maybe ensuring that you're able to provide them with a video example where they're able to watch how someone went through a building process, but then they have a space, whether it's in a laboratory, where they'll then have their bricks, they'll have the cement, they're able to then mix it themselves and then actually build a small wall and then try to see how that, whether it withstands someone pushing it. Or so that would be in terms of reenacting something that is real, but something that you want students to be able to at least have as tangible, and it's geared towards the program of study. And then the last one here in terms of mini case documentaries, this again, obviously it would, rather than, the easier option is going out and curating what is already out on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and so forth. But if there's a teacher, when you're looking at, say, for example, issues of privacy, so maybe you're focused on a program of study where one, you don't want to access a video that may be either inappropriate, or two, a video that maybe you don't have the permission for and you don't want to share that with a broader audience. This could be an option where a teacher then decides to go out and actually do a video and then use that as a way to teach the class. And good examples here, and I think I've seen it in CTE programs, is actually having the students themselves go out and shoot a video. So it could be a simple video would be if you're in a mechanics class and you want to see how do you change oil, for example, having the students go out and shoot that video and then bringing that to their class and, obviously in a closed space and sharing it with the students in your classroom. That could be one example. That obviously requires time and effort, but this is probably not that, wouldn't be that difficult if it's something that you're already wired to doing. But this just here gives you a flavor of what you may have as at your fingertips in terms of how do you effectively do documentary-based learning and low-tech simulation. So you could go from the role playing to doing more intricate mini case documentaries as examples. I've talked about, I've gone through looking at, for example, how, what the problem is, and then I've offered a documentary base as a possible avenue to begin looking at. I think even prior to the beginning of this of the discussion, I'd also mentioned, in addition, this could be something one could begin looking at the potential role of AI. But how does it all come together? How does this work? If one was a teacher, for example, or if you're doing OD or HRD and you're trying to work on a learning and development process, how does bring this to how does it work bringing the documentary-based learning and low tech to a process of helping enhance either students' awareness of the skills that are needed so that they're successful, or if you're looking at it from an employee, how do you help capacitate them so that they're able to then improve their productivity? Step one here then would be obviously the content, creating the content or curating the content. But I think one of the key things that would probably be critical is really being clear in terms of what that content is supposed to achieve. So if you're just getting content just because, just because it's on YouTube and it shows some of the things that you're trying to demonstrate, it could achieve the outcome that you're looking for. But I think being very clear in terms of what that content is, and then how does it link to the overall lesson that you would like to the class. I think that would be that will then ensure that what you're sharing with with your audience or your students or your employees would be effective. The second step is, once you've identified the content, the second step is really making sure that you have activities that are really linked to that content that you have created. So, for example, if the content, again, going back to culinary arts, is that students had the opportunity of going out and they were supposed to be preparing this unique dish up, and you've gone through the step by step. It's very clear what all the ingredients that are needed. They've all been listed. The proportion of the ingredients that they'll be using has also been shared with this with the students. And then now, when it comes to step 2, in terms of the activities, being very clear that in step 1, this is what they need to have watched. This is what they have needed to have understood. And then now this step 2 is then the instructions in terms of what they need to be doing. So this is now where you begin the role playing, having them go out and actually doing the cooking. If you have all the ingredients in a place where they're able to name them, bring them, or if you don't have the ingredient, in the case of in a low resource setting, being able to highlight to the students, being able to walk you through in terms of what ingredients would they need to be able to be successful in preparing the dish that you'd like. And then what is interconnected is the role of the teacher. So this is where it needs to be very this is where I go back to using the term innovative. The teacher then playing this facilitator role, because when you get to the final step of debrief, one of the key things that you would, before you link this to either your curriculum or putting this as part of your professional development resource, is you want to go back to those same students and ask them questions. Was the content that was selected, was it effective? Did it provide you with information that was relevant when you were doing your role-playing exercise? And then the second thing is obviously checking, was the role-playing exercise, was it effective? Did it help you build a skill that you're looking for? And then the third part that you'd like to be doing in step 3 in terms of debrief is also going back to the students and asking in terms of the facilitation. So I know the teacher is coming in and playing the role of providing all the material, but also getting that feedback in terms of, was the facilitation helpful? And this gives you a sense in terms of what other prompts do you need to include so that it helps ensure that your students understand why am I doing this and what am I hoping to get out of this particular process. But this is just a quick process in terms of how do you bring this all together in form of a lesson that you're hoping to use to develop someone's skill, whether it's students in a classroom, or if you're looking at in the context of employees, how do you then provide them with different resources and then gauging whether it's helping improve or enhance their skills. This is getting closer to my final slide, and then I'm obviously looking forward to seeing some of the thoughts. But coming back here, I just want to maybe just bring it back a full circle in terms of why, again, is this important? What are some of the real world impacts, particularly as it relates to technical and vocational education, how we're teaching and how we're learning in that particular process, and what are some of the outcomes that we're looking for. So the first one, in terms of just real impact that you should be able to see, is in terms of student engagement. This obviously will not only be enhanced, but you'll see greater motivation from the students to be involved in the learning process. And then not only that, you will see that the students actually are the ones who will eventually end up leading the process. So, the teacher probably will be the one providing the content at the beginning. The role-playing part is obviously very organic. So you will then see students not only in the engagement process, but also enhancing that particular process. So there are certain steps that you may have missed, but you'll see that students also adding to that, particularly if this is something that they've lived or have experienced. Second thing that you'll see that will emerge as a result of this, it'll help with not only enhancing the skills development that you're looking for. So if it's someone who has not had industry experience, for example, this will allow them to at least, even without going out for an internship, for an attachment, they'll have a basic understanding of what the requirements are. So going back to the example of culinary arts, if that student had only done this in a classroom setting, in a simulated process, and then now they've been put in a major kitchen and they were asked to prepare that dish, they will be able to quickly understand what ingredients that are needed, and then going through the process of ensuring that they go from pulling all the pieces together until the final dish. But this obviously will help enhance the practical skills that they need, and they're then able to demonstrate that if they're going to a job setting. In terms of the teacher, I think this obviously repositions the role, particularly if a teacher has been playing this lecture-based role. This then puts a teacher in a different role where they're facilitating the process. It's no longer a teacher-centered classroom, but it becomes a student-centered classroom, and the teacher just plays a facilitator role where you're nurturing the organic knowledge that is being generated in the classroom. But I think this in itself also allows teachers, because when you're looking at this question of when do we begin using AI in the classroom? When do we begin using all the resources at our fingertips? This also allows teachers to begin developing that confidence to be able to effectively manage the classroom. And they really don't need to be the expert because the experts are the students, and letting the students, supporting the students in whatever direction that they're going. And then the last piece, that obviously is this then also provides this equity and access. And I know this is very, it becomes very fluid. But if I go back to the example that I shared in terms of my education experience, it's very difficult if you go to a lot of global south where you say, can you afford to go buy equipment so that you can be able to use it in the classroom? But you find that the tools that we have now are actually helping with leveling the playing field. And I think the question for us as educators or as people in the education system, are we ready to be able to use it effectively to ensure that we're then able to deliver that knowledge and skills that students are looking for? And that's the broader question that I hope that as you walk away from this presentation, that at least that's the one piece that I'm hoping that you're able to take away from the presentation. I know I'm almost out of time, but I just want to maybe just highlight this as just maybe some of the initial questions that I generated as a result of thinking through about this presentation. But I'd be more than happy taking a pause, maybe handing the microphone back to Marcia, and then hearing the questions that you may all have. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A session. One is they are starting with a short story. I'm surprised by the reference to learning styles, given all the research that questions whether learning styles exist. I think there are good reasons to understand learning content in terms of modalities, such as audio, video, tactical, etc., but given the research, not in terms of individual preferences, maybe matches to type of content. I'm interested in your thoughts around this, and perhaps you're using learning styles as a term in a different way.
Thank you, Macha. Well, there are several that maybe I can take, and then, or maybe you want me to respond to this before going to the next.
Yes, please, because the other one has it has a story as well.
So and that's a great question. I use learning style, and I'll say loosely, but what I was hoping to that comes across from the presentation is it's not it's not so much so about the learning style. It's more in terms of how are people learning today, and should we as educators or even folks who are focused on L&D, should we tap into how people are learning? Uh, we find that the vast majority, and I'm guilty of this, I default to things like YouTube if I really, if I know when I was a student, there's a particular math concept that is a little bit difficult. I would then go to YouTube, see another student who went through the same thing, who had done a good PowerPoint presentation, and listening to them. Learning style, I think it's obviously it's dependent, because I think a lot of people have different ways of how they absorb information. So I don't want to get into whether one is better than the other. I think maybe the overall message that I'm trying to advocate for is this the time, given all the resources that we have, and when I say resources, I mean in terms of technology, the learning style should be actually something that actually now becomes something that we're not worried about, because we have technology that is able to cater to everyone's unique need. I think one of the biggest debates we've seen in education, particularly in how we teach folks, is how do we personalize education? Because everyone learns at different paces. And everyone has different learning styles. So I might be an auditory learner, while there's someone else who's a visual learner, and then there's someone who's a kinesthetic learner. But it was always difficult as a teacher. How do you cater to all those different learning styles? But with technology, it's easy for you to be able to at least find a middle ground. And to be honest, in a classroom, I would assume with the learning platform, something a teacher can easily do is at the beginning of class, now that we have the advent of technology, is maybe engaging students and asking them, what is your preference? What would be the most way for me to support you in your learning journey? And I would assume each person would have something that they would say, well, this, having content delivered to me in this way versus that would be most preferential. And given the fact that the teacher is playing this role of facilitator, you're then able to provide those particular resources. So that's what I was pushing for. But the point is well noted. So I'm not advocating for any specific learning style, but I feel like technology now can make learning style be adapted to each unique learner's context. I hope that answered the question that the participant had.
Thank you. The other one is I'm a big fan of using videos for learning, so appreciate earlier comments on it. In my mind, I bring the real world into the classroom, and for performance support, can take the classroom into the world. However, a lot of videos are poorly produced and structured in a way that don't support learning. Drawing on the library of YouTube or library of Instagram is a great low-tech resource, but what about the multitude of videos that have inaccurate content and other content that is structured poorly and works against comprehension and retention? How do you help teachers navigate those risks?
And that's a very good question. And I think it was one of the questions that I had on my list. But I think this is now what we need to worry about. So it's great that we're pushing for using video storytelling technology, but the real risk is obviously making sure that, one, we're providing relevant information. Maybe something specific. I'm obviously an educator, and the space that I'm interested in is making sure that what you're teaching students, whether they're young kids or adult student, is making sure that, one, it's relevant, but it's also accurate. And I think with the rapid growth of technology, there's obviously opportunities to have misleading information. And I think this is where I think as teachers, we need to at least, I think the first step for me is having them embrace the technology and being able to realize this is how a lot of the students are actually learning. Now, the part as a teacher is if you want to use YouTube, then the bulk of the work would be on you trying to curate the ones that you think are relevant and have accurate information. Something that is really exciting to me, and I, obviously was not the focus of this presentation, is that we're seeing AI, where you're able to go out, write a script, and then AI creates a video, right? And this is where we will find teachers, if you don't have time to curate or you're not able to find materials that are appropriate in YouTube, TikTok, AI can begin creating this video for you that you then can use as a way to start the conversation in your classroom and then transition to doing a role play. Yeah, I think that's a difficult one. I remain hopeful that every day when I blink my eye, technology seems to get a little bit better and better. So I would say I do agree that this is obviously something that one has to go into cautiously, but technology is rapidly making things much, much easier.
Thank you. There's another question. In what ways can documentary based learning improve the connection between theory and real world practices in classrooms?
So documentary, and when I say documentary based learning, maybe a good example that I should be given, because this is something that has been done, and I go back, the word innovation is maybe not accurate. It's just getting things that we've done, but we're not really using very well. If we look at the airline industry, for example, pilots have always learned through stories in terms of how do you ensure that you're navigating, or if you lose your navigational signs, how do you begin making sure that you're headed in the right direction? So they've been using stories in terms of what someone did, so that you're able to, when you fall into that particular situation, you're able to do that. So this is connecting some of the theory that they're being taught in class, but it's also something that they're going to be doing in practice. An industry that uses stories and story-based narrative a lot, is the health field. When you look at a lot of nurses, for example, you're not able to go out and actually work on a real person. So you have to, you spend a lot of your time doing some of the theory, and then within that theory, some of it is done through narrative. And I think there's even a terminology, narrative pedagogy. So a good example, for example, if you're dealing with a patient who's going through grieving or is going through end of life process, not many students will be told, go and look for someone who's in an end of life. A lot of that is through stories in terms of what did someone do in that particular context? How did you care for that particular person to ensure that they go out with dignity and they had the support that they needed that was dignified? A lot of that is done in stories. I think the reason why we haven't done a lot of story telling, particularly in our form, it takes a lot of time and effort, and one has to be intentional. And that's why I'm saying this is the right time as a result of us having technology that we're able to make it a little bit more efficient. But there are industries that use it and have used it successfully. So the healthcare industry is one, and then when you're looking at the airline industry, that's another industry that has used it for some time. But the question is, how do we then begin using it in our area of specialization?
Thank you. There's another question. How do documentary based learning and low tech simulations align with different learning styles mentioned in your presentation?
That's another good question. So documentary-based learning primarily will support the auditory and the visual type of learning. So it will not be supporting the kinesthetic, the learning by doing. And the reason why I pair both of them is, one, in terms of the auditory and visual, that probably gives you the story, or at least gives you kind of like what needs to be done. And then when you do the low tech, then you go back to learning by doing. Maybe what I should say, and this goes back to even the earlier question when we were talking about learning style. The reason why, when we look at particularly auditory and visual, for a very long time, we as human beings tend to retain more information when it's told in a story form. I cannot tell you the number of times, particularly now when everyone is watching the news, particularly even during political cycles, you'll find that the stories that you hear in the news, people are able to repeat that with a lot of efficiency. If you gave someone the newspaper to read, you'll find that you're not able to remember a lot of the information. And I'm not saying that everyone will not remember. I'm just saying, in terms of we as humans, we tend to be easily wired to hearing a story. And we tend to retain more information. And I think when you are able to then remember the story, then you're able, when you go to the doing part, you're then able to actually repeat what you've had or what you've seen. And so I think there's a pairing of both. So documentary based learning focuses on the auditory and visual, and then the role playing focuses mostly on the kinesthetic. But you need to pair both to be successful.
Thank you. And we have a last question here. How do the strategies presented support the development of employability and practical skills among students?
Very good question, and I wish we would have spent more time talking about that. There is so what, and maybe just I'll use an example of a global south, and then you can obviously bring that to the context of the US, especially if you're looking at a place where you don't have all the resources that you need. When you go to a lot of the global south countries, one of the biggest challenges is students will not have either equipment or resources to be able to either observe so that they understand what is needed in the world of work, and then they don't have the opportunity to even role play. So when they graduate, because they've done a lot of theory based, when you go to an employer and you're asked, for example, you've come and you want to be a welder, for example, and you're asked specific things, what would you do when this happens? And you're not able to fully articulate that because you only did a lot of it in theory, and you're not able to retain, you didn't remember all the steps that were there. That is then what becomes a challenge. When you hear me talking about the documentary based and the role playing, this is actually maybe beneficial, particularly in places where you don't have an opportunity to go for an internship or for an attachment, or you're not able to go to a place and physically have that opportunity to play around or tinker around with the equipment. So it allows you to do it in a safe place in your area, whether it's in school, at home, and then apply that so that when you go to the job, you're then able to demonstrate, because I think a lot of the technical and trade fields, one of the expectation would be, can you show us how to do this? Now, if you're not able to show someone how to do that because you never had an internship, then it's automatically they'll say you don't have the skill. But I'm saying that if we use this other creative ways, you can be able, it helps to enhance those skills, at least remembering some of the steps, and you're able then to demonstrate this is how you do an oil change, for example, or this is how you weld, even though you've never actually had a cut to change an oil change, or you've not actually done an actual welding.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeffrey Matthew. On behalf of our Organization Development and Change Workforce Education and Development Program, we hope you had a very good session and you enjoyed it today. If we did not get to your questions, please send us an email or reach out to the presenter directly via email. For future webinar, we would like to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Please take the survey using the link in the chat box. Our next webinar is Unlocking Lean Six Sigma, Streamline Processes, Maximize Efficiency, and achieve operational excellence for greater success in your role. This will be held on May 30th, 2025, from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The registration for all events are free and can be found on our website. You can also find us on our social media platforms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon. Have a good day and a good night to our guests from other time zones.
Thank you. Take care.